Hey guys, and welcome to part 5 of Create Your Own Webshop with ESP.net. In our last lesson we expanded upon our model classes so that they are now able to perform basic CRUD operations. CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update and Delete statements, in case you're wondering. In today's lesson we are going to be building a webshop page that will display all of the fine data which we have been creating over the course of the last lessons, as well as a detail page which will give a more detailed overview about a selected product, as well as provide functionality to allow a user to order a number between 1 and 20 of that selected product. So let's get started by working on the webshop page. This page will also function as a landing, aka start page or home page. Open up the project which we've created in our previous lesson, or if you're just joining us today, you can download the starter pack from the description below this video and open the project found within. Open your Solution Explorer and right-click your solution file and select Add New Item. Then add a new web form and call it Index. This is going to be our website start page. And don't forget to select your master page. And then right-click your newly created index page and select Set as Start Page. Whenever we run this solution now, this page will be the first one to be displayed. Once that's done, open up your master page and look for the webshop hyperlink within the navigation diffs and set its navigate URL property to index.aspx. Head over to the Design tab of index.aspx and drag and drop a panel control on the new page. Select it, open its properties and set its ID property to Panel Products. First, a quick word of exposition. Whenever we find a product in table Products, we are going to create a new dynamic panel, and on that panel we are going to place an image button, a label detailing the product's name, and a label detailing the product's price. Then we will add that dynamic panel and its child controls to the static panel. Go to the index pages code behind file and create a new void called private void fill page. No input parameters. Within that method, type in the following code. Alright, a bit of explanation. Once we are sure products exist in the database, we create a new dynamic panel with an image button and two labels for each product. We set the CSS classes to classes which we'll create in a little while. We've set the postback URL to page product, which we have yet to create, along with that product's ID parameter. Then we add those child controls to the dynamic panel, along with a bit of white space between the label and the button. We then add that panel to the panel which is placed on the web form by hand, and we will also return a small error message whenever no products can be found. Alright, now all that we need to do is call this method in the page load event. We can now run the project to see if everything's working. And as you can see, the index page gets loaded and it displays all objects available in the database. Of course, it kinda looks like a mess right now because we haven't applied any CSS style to it yet. So let's add a bit of style now. In Visual Studio, go to your styles/style sheet file, and at the bottom of the file add the following CSS codes. We're going to start off by writing some CSS style for panel products. Unfortunately, since this is a dynamic panel, Visual Studio has a rather nasty tendency to place the name of the content placeholder in which the panel is located in front of the panel itself. If that makes any sense. In layman's terms, instead of writing down hashtag panel products, we need to write down hashtag content placeholder 1 underscore panel products div, like this. There we go. Now just write down the following CSS codes. There we go. Let's try refreshing the page. And as you can see, things already look a lot better. Thanks to the float left used on the panel product divs, we can align images sideways of each other. However, floating elements tend to overflow out of their parent containers, like shown here. Notice how the unit prices on the second row appear outside of the white container. A quick yet dirty fix to this problem is the empty div method. This method consists of adding an empty div behind the floating elements. To do this, go back to Visual Studio and in your index page open your source view, and below the panel product tags type in div style equals clear both, close divs. If you save and refresh the page, you'll notice that additional white space has been added to contain all the floating elements. Now let's get working on that detail page. As mentioned before, when the user clicks a product, they will be redirected to this page where they can see a larger version of the image, the product's description, the ID number, the price per unit, a drop-down list in which a user can select a quantity between 1 and 20, along with a button to add said products and this quantity to the shopping cart. Right-click the Pages folder and add a new web form. Call it Product. Don't forget to select your master page. And within the new page source viewer, add a new table and add a new row with 2 columns. Then copy that row 3 times so that we have a total of 4 rows with 2 columns each. The first column in the first row is going to contain the image, so set its row span property to 4 so that it will take up the height of 4 entire rows. Within the column itself, drag and drop an image control, like this, and set its ID property to EMG product, and its CSS class to details image, which we'll create in a little while. Within the second column, add a header2 parameter, and between that add a new label, call it label title, and below that label add a horizontal rule, HR, and in the first column of the second row add yet another label, lots of labels today, and set its ID to label description and its CSS class to details description. There we go. In the second column, add another label and call it label price, and set its CSS class to details price. Add a white line, and below that white line type in quantity equals and drag and drop a drop-down list and set its ID parameter to TDL amount. Add another white line and below that another label with its ID set to LBL result and remove its text property. Moving on to the third row, delete one of the columns so that there is a total of 1 column, and between the remaining column type in product number equals, and behind that drag and drop a label, set its ID to LBL item number, and in row 4 delete one of the columns as well, add yet another label, and set its text property to available, and have the CSS class set to product price, which already exists. There we go. This is a table that we are going to use to display all of our detail information. Now go to your code behind file and create a new private void called fill page. No input parameters. And type in the following code. So that should do it. Let's check to see if everything is working correctly. I'm going to click on a random object, and as you can see, the page now displays a detailed view of a selected product. Of course, we still need to apply some CSS code. So go back to your styles/style sheet folder and add the following CSS classes. There we go, that should do it. Of course, you can modify these CSS styles in any way that you see fit. These are just my preferred settings. To conclude today's lesson, we're going to add a button to page product that will allow users to order a number of a selected product. So on page product, drag and drop a button control below the quantity drop-down list. Set its ID to btn add, its CSS class to button, and update the text property to add product. There we go. Then double click the button to generate a button add click event. Let's take a quick look at a shopping cart object. If you remember, each object of course has an ID parameter, a client ID parameter detailing which client ordered the object, the ID of the selected object, the amount being purchased, the date on when it was purchased, and a boolean detailing whether a product is still in the shopping cart or has already been deleted or purchased. With that theory in mind, let's get started on it. So in the button add click method, the first thing which we need to do is check if a product ID parameter exists in the URL. So type in if not string is null or whitespace. You should remember this from our previous lesson. Request.queryString square brackets string ID. So if this check passes, then there is an ID parameter in the URL. Start off by declaring a string client ID. For now we're going to set it to -1. In a later lesson, once you have learned how you can let your users register and log in, we will use the actual client ID of the logged in user. But for now, a -1 will do just fine. Then retrieve the product ID from the URL by typing in convert to int32 request.queryString ID. Next retrieve the amount of ordered objects. Type in int amount equals convert to int32 ddl amount dot selected value. There we go. Next create a new cart object called cart. Use curly brackets to call its constructor and fill in its missing parameters. So amount equals amount, client ID equals client ID, date purchased equals today. you can get the current dates by typing in datetime.now. Is in cart equals true. And product ID equals ID. There we go. Last but not least, create a new cart model object called model and set the text property of label result to the output of cart models insert cart method with your newly created cart object as input parameter. That should do it. Let's check it out, see if everything is working correctly. So let's try adding some clutch kits. I'll order 2. Maybe I'll order a bit of engine oil as well. And I'll order a whole lot of car batteries. So there we go, we get a successful insertion message. Now let's check out the database. And as you can see, the objects along with their amounts and their date purchased have been added to the database. So that concludes today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any further questions, feel free to ask me them in the comment section below or discuss it on the forums. There is a link in the description as well. As always, thank you for watching and be sure to check in for next lesson in which you will learn how you can let the user register and log in on your site.